everyone! Today I wanted to make a quick little video talking about a book that I recently finished reading, and ever since I did, I've been wanting to share my thoughts on it, but I have no one in my personal life who has read this book or who has read any of the work from this author, so I thought, why not just make a little video. So the book that I'm talking about is by the one and only Anaïs, and it is her Delta of Venus, which is a collection of some of her short erotica stories. Now, this is the first Anaïs book that I have read, and initially I became interested in wanting to get to know more about her and about her work through Pinterest. I always have little excerpts and quotes popping up on my personalized Pinterest feed from different authors and writers, and that's how I discover a lot of incredible writers that I now love. So that's how I discovered Anaïs, and that's a little tip from me to use Pinterest to discover new literature. But either way, I'm gonna go ahead and just get into a little bit of her backstory and then talk about what I thought about this. But before I share my thoughts on the book, I just want to get into a little bit of her backstory and how she was regarded in the public, which I think is important to know going into reading Anaïs. So she was born in 1903 in France, to a Cuban father and I believe a Danish mother. So she grew up there in France until I believe it was her early adolescence. Her father left the family, and so her mother decided to move the family and relocate to New York. And then later on in the 20s, she got married and she moved back to France and lived in Paris and began working as a writer. So a lot of Anaïs Nin's image is very scandalized in the media because she had a very unconventional view on romantic relationships and how she decided to pursue her own personal romantic relationships in her life. For example, she had the infamous 2 husbands at the same time whom she would go see one after another, and they didn't know about each other. And another fact that I found very shocking about her is that in one of her diaries, in her personal diaries, she writes about, she goes into detail about having intimate relations with her father. And so there's a lot of mixed opinion on that as well. Some say, you know, she was making up this fantasy to deal with the fact that her father abandoned her. And so she, at times, through her erotica, she is an erotic writer, so through her expressing her personal female pleasure and experiences that she had, she was regarded as, you know, the ultimate figure of women's liberation and freedom. And then at times she was regarded very negatively and seemed to be deceptive and scandalous. However, putting all of her personal controversies aside, I do recommend going into reading Anaïs Nin with an open mind in order to be able to experience her style of writing as she intended to. And also, I personally believe this still stands true to today. Any woman who decides to express her ideas and views, her thoughts on pleasure and relationship dynamics, and especially if that's outside of the patriarchal norm, that woman will be regarded controversially. And so I can only imagine doing so in the early 20th century. So just keeping that in mind, and now that we know a little bit more about her, let's get into Delta Venus. So at times when I read books, I skip the preface part in the beginning, but I'm glad I didn't with this book because it is very important to understand the context of what was going on in Anaïs Nin's life and why she wrote these short stories in the first place. So, as you can imagine, she's a young writer in Paris. It's the 1940s, and she's trying to get by. She's trying to make it as a writer and sustain herself and her lifestyle in order to keep on continuing to write. So she gets offered an opportunity, a job, to write short stories for an anonymous client. And so, of course, she takes the job and begins to write these short stories and begins to send them to the client to get paid. And the client reiterates, well, Anaïs reiterates multiple times that the client would send back feedback and repeatedly tell her to cut down on the emotional parts. So he did not want these erotic short stories to be filled with emotions, to be filled with the descriptions of senses, and to be filled with the part that relationship dynamics play in cultivating an erotic story. He simply wanted the erotic stories to be filled with just crude descriptions of sex. And so Anaïs begins to describe how she begins to feel a strong feeling of hatred, and she really begins to despise this client who keeps on giving her this criticism as she sends the short stories to him, to keep the books very crude and to take from the eroticism the most important part of what makes eroticism erotic, which is really everything that comes before it. And so throughout the book, as I got deeper into the short stories, I was really able to read and really able to recognize how she was suppressing herself, and how hard it must have been for her to not have the free will to be able to write on a topic that's so unique to everyone. And so as I began to get deeper into the book, I was really able to recognize and feel the suppression of her self-expression, as she did not have the free will to be able to describe erotica in the manner that she wanted, in the way that she wanted, which was very sensible and very deep and very emotional, and at the baseline of it all, very feminine. And so it was really interesting because there's so many parts throughout all the different short stories where it almost feels like you can see the lights through the cracks, and you can see how she's not, of course, because she's still the one writing, she's not able to write robotically. She's not able to enter the mind of someone else and write through their point of view. So you can really sense and feel that struggle of her trying her hardest to suppress herself, but there's so many moments where you get glimpses of her true feelings and how she truly wanted, to write about a certain scenario or a certain scene or certain emotions two people are feeling. And I really also linked that with modern day society. Even though it's been 80 years since the 1940s, women still don't have the space that we should be given to express ourselves, express our femininity, and to be able to really fully embody our natural and true erotic selves. And that's still very looked down upon, very frowned down on, and that is sad to think about, because it has been it seems like we're at the cusp of such a brand new, exciting, innovative, technological, advanced time, but still women's needs are not fully met. And so I think that link between her personal experience in having to express herself and how that's still stays true for so many women, I thought that was very interesting. Whether you're a writer, whether you're an artist, whether you're a dancer, whether you're working in a male-dominated field, it's just hard for women to be accepted for who they are, still. So now I'm going to discuss finally, the short stories themselves. And honestly, I did not know what to expect, and it was definitely a wild ride. But I will say there are short stories in here that express darker sexual fantasies, and a lot of people were turned off by this book because of that. Now, I do not believe that art's sole purpose is to leave the consumer feeling comfortable. Like, art is not meant to be confined into this sort of comfortable limitation. The purpose of art, and I feel like how I'm able to recognize that an artist has done their job well, is when whatever emotion they're trying to portray, whatever emotion they're trying to express, so that the consumer is also able to feel that, it must be expressed well enough for you to be left feeling whatever that emotion may be. And all of us have a dark side and a light side, and so as long as you know, the movie you watched, or the book you read, or the song that you listened to left you feeling, either it could be sad or happy, it could be hopeless, it could be joyful. As long as it left you feeling those emotions strongly, it's done its job well. So the short stories in Delta of Venus, each and every one of them left me feeling strongly a very different emotion, and I thought that was so interesting. One night I would read one story and I would feel so shocked, and I would feel so taken aback, and another night I would read another story and I would feel you know, like very romantic and very sensual and very, you know, and that also plays into how, you know, these short stories were being written for a client. And so I think there's some stories in here that were more catered for him, and some were a little bit more of her side and her view on erotica, you know, is expressed. And so her overall, her descriptions of the erotica in these short stories were very beautifully done, and it really opened up my mind. The reason I love reading erotica is because erotica in itself, pleasure, and the way we feel intimacy is so unique to each and every one of us. And so I love to be able to dive into another person's view of how they feel, and how they express themselves in an intimate, sensual way. And so I think that's the gift that erotica writers give to us, because what makes a good erotica writer in my opinion, is when they're able to give words to sensations and feelings and emotions that a lot of the time we feel like are undescribable. And Anaïs does that flawlessly. And so I'm really excited. I think Delta of Venus, unintentionally, was a really good first choice of mine to read of hers, because it really sparked my curiosity in wanting to know more about how she views erotica and intimacy, because this, again, as I mentioned, was written for a client, so she didn't have, you know, her full free will in describing erotica how she wanted to. And so this has really sparked my interest to go ahead and read some of her essays and some of her diaries, which I've heard are very intimate, and to be able to see, you know, really diving deeply into her world of eroticism. This was like a little tease, I feel like. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say today about Delta of Venus, and yeah, I really did enjoy this book.